I mean, I think there's a couple of things at play here. Because, I mean, GPT, rolled out to public in, December of 22? So we're coming up on 2 years. So we're looking at Moore's Law. If that holds true, then, computing power doubles every couple of years. So you're going to have more power on the edge with your devices. But then also, I mean, I think the best applications of AI are going to be the ones you don't even know are there. It's just going to be a better UX. So, I mean, I think whether it's how you navigate your iPhone or your Android or whatever, or how it helps you search for things, and you don't even realize that it's going on under the hood, but it's using these models, I think it's going to be where the real sausage is made. And whoever's offering the best user experience is going to, probably, maybe claw back some, market share or whatever. But I mean, again, I think there's still going to be the factions that are Apple versus Android. But
actually, I mean, even outside of like, even outside of like manufacturing, like versus Apple versus Android and whatnot, I was just, that reminded me, I thought of this. I don't know, have you guys heard of like Aura rings and whatnot?
no.
Okay, they're really, really cool product, but I wear one. It's like
Okay,
yeah,
I know what you're talking about.
yeah. Basically, like it monitors your heart rate throughout the night. It like essentially tells you how much REM sleep and whatnot you got. Um, and companies like that are actually targeting or like trying to like partner with other companies. There was one that came up on my app the other day. It's called Natural Cycles. Obviously, it's for women, but it's essentially like their app. Like you track like the different things, right? But one of their things that they have within that app, apparently, because I was like reading through it, kind of curious, is like they do like predicted ovulation, which for people is like really relevant, especially if you want to have kids or like you have fertility issues and whatnot. But that's like a
Sure.
smaller scale model that they use, like based off of like all of your historical body temp data. They'll actually predict that out and take all the inputs of what you put into like the app and then use that to like spit out an estimated calculation, which I thought was interesting. So
yeah. Well, then it just comes back to like people's like comfortability, because I mean, I think we talk about this a lot, whether it's having a Amazon Echo device in your house or whatever else, and you're like, well, some people are all tinfoil hat and I don't want any of those things in my house, and keep that stuff away from me. And then other people are like, I'm not that interesting, take all my data and make my life easier or better because of it. So it's just kind of depends on what side of the spectrum you're on, I think.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think
then you got people like me in the middle.
Oh, sorry, I cut John off.
Sorry, the lag is real. I like to mess. I have them, but I like to mess with them. Like I turn them all around so that they can't map my house and how I move through it and stuff like that, just to try and feel like I have some control over it, even though I don't.
Some control, yeah.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing someone told me is like you are the product, because one of my friends here in Midland, actually she doesn't even work in oil and gas, but she does like advertising and marketing for like big companies like clothing and whatnot, and does like Facebook marketing and essentially does paid ads. And we were kind of getting into that, and like a lot of the statistics and like stuff that they have behind that is like very fascinating. And like, I mean, it's a whole separate industry. So I don't know. I think we'll see an explosion, like
super
you said.
creepy too.
Yeah. It's just like, it's kind of scary sometimes.
Oh, it's terrifying. The more I got into marketing, the more I was like, man, this is nuts. The amount of data that they are collecting,
generating,
the screen recordings, of all your interactions with.
Yeah. Yeah. Even with Netflix, like how many times like you go and log in, they track like those clicks and then see like how long did you spend on the app? What did you actually click on? What did you end up playing? And like that real time data is just like mind boggling. So,
yeah. So, I mean, with that, I mean, I think it's a good segue because I think both of you do, but I think, Sarah, you've got some experience kind of with some of that marketing data, right? From previous experiences.
Right. Yeah. I think, like that was the interesting thing because like I had told you guys, I worked on the sales analytics team for that big international funeral company, Service Corp International, and the way in which you market to people is just kind of wild, right? Like there's at least numerous methods in which you can reach somebody. There's like seminars, there's mailers, there's digital paid advertisements, right? There's digital organic is what they called it, and then there's like oh man, it was just like a whole treasure trove of stuff. And like our marketing team used this company called Treasure Data, which they're really good. Like I mean, at least their models were very efficient, or at least like their interface was helpful in like pulling our data from disparate sources, combining it, and then we could actually go in and tweak models and then like redeploy how we saw fit because there were different like there's different metrics for each region because the way people buy differs from like the East Coast to the West, which you wouldn't think it would matter,
Yeah.
but regionality does matter. And even
Oh,
when,
sure.
yeah, and it was just like, it was so fascinating because we did a lot of like, or at least I did a lot of like predictive analytics with leads. So how likely is a lead to convert, right? Like if I called my parents or yeah, let's just use my parents as an example. If I called them, or interacted with them in via 3 different marketing channels, like how many touch points would we have to have before they were more likely to like set up an appointment? And at that point, we said, okay, if someone sets an appointment, they're more likely to purchase. At least one part, like there are 4 different contracts that they could sign, right? It was for travel insurance. So essentially, if I passed away and I was in Ohio and I want to be buried back in Texas, they could actually ship my body back here to Texas. Or, there was also like cemetery property, cemetery merchandise, and then there was like one other thing. And that's for like normal funerals. Obviously, that doesn't look at like cremations. They did see a spike in that. But, anyways, as far as for leads, it was really fascinating because like there is there's a lot of like nuances that go into sales and marketing, and at which point do you consider a lead to have converted? And like obviously it's if you buy, but like how many touch points do you need to have before that person is more likely to purchase? And regionality was huge within our models.
A lot of people don't realize like the modern marketing approach is you have to have like 5 to 10 touch points for someone to remember the name of your company even. And like that's why, product placement and influencer marketing and all these things work, is because they're in front of you all the time.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yep. So, I mean, kind of looking at the tech side of that. So you said that regionality was huge. So obviously you had to have done some analysis to get to that. So like how are you guys getting the data, say, from those models, from those companies, or from what different channels were you ingesting, APIs and whatever else, and what were you using to get the data into, what kind of backends were you using, what were you using to analyze it?
Yeah.
Just let's dive into that.
Yeah, no, it was kind of, it was weird because we were very much, and this is a good example of like, old dog, new tricks. We were, our entire corporation was on-site, on-prem, right? So all the data, and also because they handled like insurance, it was very much like everything had to be documented, everything had to be above board, and in certain capacities. And like for our sales team, they exclusively use Salesforce, right? And what happened, at least for me, was I was hired and they had brought in this consultant essentially to come in and help them like scale and build models and deploy it within Salesforce itself, which is very fascinating because when Salesforce bought Tableau, they have an integrated version of Tableau within Salesforce. They call it Analytics Studio, I think. And basically end users can navigate within like the Salesforce web page immediately to Tableau, but they don't even realize like the user experience is very seamless. But conversely, you could build and generate models using something like that they called Einstein Analytics. So you could actually do model deployment natively within their software. So it kind of took out like intermediate steps of like needing APIs, needing to do calls, and like using
Yeah.
something like Databricks or what have you. Basically, like all of our data was housed within Salesforce, but we also were able to hit our actual data warehouse, but again, on-site on-prem, right? So you're limited in scale and like data that you could pull. And obviously, like we were training and analyzing and doing all this stuff using like Python or Jump or what have you, essentially trying to like understand patterns and then taking like, okay, hey, we think this is a good model. Like I like these metrics, right? And I think, we've done it on our training data set. We did it on our test data set, and like we have a holdout, right? And I'm going to take that holdout data set. I'm going to feed it back into Einstein Analytics within Salesforce, and then validate that it's spitting out a model that I think is accurate, and then essentially like tweaking it and actually deploying it natively within Salesforce itself. So our end users would actually open up their web page every day. They would have a list of leads, and they would actually have colors associated with them that were like priorities of what to focus on. And it was based off of like if we had people's contact information, and certain things like that, and where they were located, and like how many interactions we had with them. To be totally honest, like the data I dealt with was like so nuanced because there were different there are so many different touch points within periods of time. And then how do you link all those together to attribute back to like, hey, this is the campaign, or this is like how we actually brought them in, and this is what really got them over the hurdle of like purchasing. So it was
the
a
user
very
journey is a fascinating thing.
Yeah, and it's one of those things like you have to think about it from the business perspective, right? And in the business perspective, it was the pandemic. How do we sell more efficiently when you can't actually meet with anybody? Because again, like appointments were the way in which all of our sales reps were able to get people to purchase, basically. Yeah.
So I've got two things there that I don't want to lose in my brain.
Yeah.
First one, I want to hit on Jump because that's a technology we haven't talked about here. And then second, let's talk about working for a funeral company during a global pandemic.
Yeah.
Business had to be booming, I'm assuming. So,
like to be honest, whenever I started, it was, well, I mean, like to a certain degree, they did see like an increase in sales, like in pre-need sales. So like what I did was essentially like if you wanted to pre-plan for your untimely demise, you could meet with a counselor and essentially like pre-buy, pre-plan, and like say, all right, upon my death, this is how I want you guys to remember me by. Either like put me out on a boat and like shoot a flaming arrow. Like legally you can't do that. I'm just like caveat, but
sounds like that may have been asked before.
Yeah, well, people actually like they had a new thing right before I left where people could be composted, which I thought was really weird, but that was apparently marketing really well. And I was like, I'm not into that. Obviously, it was in Oregon, and that was like a huge hitter there. But I was like, this is odd. I just set me on fire. I'm good. Like, but to answer your question, it's funny because whenever we were building models, we actually had to exclude March 2020, April 2020, because metrics were just like wildly off and business was like not operating as normal. There's like the fear factor. There's also a lot of it has to do with like, the state of the world, like is it harder to buy a house? Like interest rates are going up and stuff like that. That really affected things too.
Yeah.
So I'd say it was pretty
FUD in the crypto markets.
Yeah.
Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, actually, and it's funny you bring up, well, I'll come back to crypto, but like it's funny because you would expect to have seen like a massive boom, and they did to a degree, but not anything that I would have considered statistically significant. And ultimately, in any time series models that we looked at, like we had to exclude those points in time just because everything was like so off the wall, out of the norm, that it just made
Yeah.
your metrics look nutty. So like yes and no, I would say for that one.
But what? Let's come back to Jump then real quick, because like again, just and I just doing a quick little search. Is that JMP and it's just
It's
call it Jump?
It's JMP. It's owned by
Okay.
a company called SAS. So
Oh, okay. So it's a SaaS product. Okay.
yes,
Not SaaS. SAS.
yeah, SAS. So have you all heard of SAS before, or used it, or interacted with it? Okay.
I did a very quick like Udemy course on it one time, and all I remember is Run SAS Run or Go SAS Go or something.
Yeah. It's like Run SAS something, or Go SAS or whatever, what have you. But ironically, so in my graduate school program, they actually did a partnership with SAS, right? And so we got the Jump and SAS software for free for the years in which we were in graduate school. And it made sense because a lot, like at least a few of my professors, they were data scientists at MD Anderson. And, whenever you're running cancer studies, you have to have a software that's actually auditable. And especially in the banking industry, they want something where they can be like, this is exactly how this model was built. This is how it's controlled, right? And like, this is how we tie back to it. Actually, it's really ironic we bring that up because while I was traveling over the last summer, obviously I ran into like a lot of other digital nomads, and some of them had very different jobs. And one of the girls, she was from Denmark, and her company only used SaaS. And like, it was really funny because in oil and gas, like a lot of people will use Python and like whatever platform you really want, like Python, RStudio, what have you. Yeah. And I mean, those are good, but when you're dealing with like insurance, banking, and healthcare, they want like a software that's like tried, true, maintained, and is not open source, essentially. And actually, and so Jump is, I'm getting to that, but Jump is actually a subsidiary of SAS, and it's more like point click. It's actually a really great software. Whenever I was using it, at least for school, and then, and I guess I can talk about this a little bit. I can't like discuss the data because I signed a non-disclosure agreement, but so CYA, I don't look good in orange, but it's a really, I really like their platforms.
Those won't be valid for. They just came out. And
this won't be valid for
the
that.
FTC. Yeah. Did you see that? Speaking of news,
Yeah.
Crazy.
No. What was it? Yeah, we use that platform or that software a lot, and it was great because it took the coding aspect out of it to a certain degree, but it was really powerful in the sense of like I could create, a histogram of all my data within like 10 seconds, and versus like having to build out the code, maintain the code and whatnot. I could do undersampling fairly easily. It could handle large data sets, right? But at one point, a good example again is like we did a data competition for Humana, which is actually, and I'm sure like some people who listen to this podcast are gonna be like, oh my God, I can't believe they did this. But they wanted to predict how likely you were to get the COVID vaccine, because they were going to create a targeted marketing campaign around your likelihood to actually go get stabbed, which was very fascinating, right? And we used Jump for that competition because one, like this was something that they were going to actually deploy, and it had to be like structured and it had to be like auditable to a certain degree. I know some of the folks use like open source platforms because it was multiple universities that participated. We made it to the top 10, so our model was like good enough. but like if we hadn't had having Jump made it like much faster to iterate and figure things out, especially as I was learning more about like coding and like how I wanted to do model building and whatnot. It just made it that much more simpler. Also because it was like, it's very much maintained on the back end by statisticians and everything else. So I loved it, to be honest. It's a cool software.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, because obviously, I use a lot of open source, Python, R, whatever, and I think there's obviously pros and cons. Cost being a major one, obviously, in general. Right. But I mean, I think what was it? Probably 5 or so years ago, I think didn't they find an issue with scikit-learn, and that I think the way it was doing some regression analysis or something was wrong, and I think it invalidated like tons of academic papers and such. So there's definitely a risk that I think people are very trusting, myself included, and you just assume that these people have done right. And I don't think they did it nefariously, but without the right checks and balances, there's that. And then there's also the support side. Like I can maybe hopefully I can reach out to the maintainer on GitHub and he'll reply within like the next week. Right. But again, like someone like SaaS, if you have the support and you're paying for it, you can call them in 5 minutes and be on the phone with someone. So there's definitely pros and cons.
Yeah. I don't know. Have you guys ever had exposure to it? I mean, other than Udemy, or seen any other companies use it?
No. I mean, I think when I was at Conoco, it may have been Jump. I'm not sure. I think one of the data scientists, he was kind of a geophysics guy who did some data science. I think he was using a SaaS product. It may have been Jump. I'm not exactly sure. To do like a multivariate analysis on some like completion parameters, but I think it's probably something you would probably see it more at a bigger company, as opposed to, again, like you start getting mid cap, kind of like Grayson Mill and down, and they're not going to pay for a $50,000 license of this when they could probably get the same answer for free, with R or Python. So it's just a matter of your appetite for risk, and we talk about that a lot here. And I think in that case, there's probably the appetite for it. Well, I mean, we say that oil and gas companies don't want to take that risk on, but I think there's also different applications. Again, I don't know. I mean, so you talked about deploying it or whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, how would you deploy a jump model, or how would Humana or something like that deploy a jump model? Because now I'm thinking like at least R, Python, especially, like you can containerize it, and now it's much more easy to probably integrate with applications, I would imagine. But I'm guessing probably SaaS has a way to call it from an API, or how that works. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's been 2 years since I've used it, or maybe a while since I've really like touched it or looked at it. I know there was a way in which like they would actually say, okay, if you want to export this, you can export it as code, and essentially have like a Python script that will run, and then you can deploy it however you want. But I think they did do API calls as well, where you could essentially still containerize it to a certain degree, but the methods were a little bit like, there were like maybe a few more steps involved with it, but I'd honestly have to go back and ask.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I was just curious if.
I don't know.
Humana got me thinking.
Humana never told us anything. Like they're like, hey, a bunch of grad students, free work. Like we want you to solve this problem for us.
Heck yeah, good for them. Good work if you can get it.
Yeah. So I mean, it worked out. It was a good learning experience, and I'm glad I know the tool, because like outside of the oil and gas industry, it is a popular software to have some knowledge of. So
sure.
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, we talked a lot about that now. I mean, so how and why oil and gas? I mean, has it always been in your veins, or did you just start it? I think leading questions, we kind of know the answer already, obviously, since this is our second go around. But how'd you get into it?
Well, I think in typical oil field fashion, I feel like, and I know, John, you mentioned this last time, how you like had no idea what oil and gas was to a certain degree, like before falling into it.
Nothing.
I feel like for me, nothing. And even for me, it was weird because my grandfather, obviously, he was in oil and gas, but I think the real turning point, because I was reflecting on this after I talked to you guys, was whenever Devin actually came and drilled on my family's property. whenever I was a kid, or not, and I wasn't a kid, but I was like much younger than I am now. I was like in high school, but but I can't reveal my age. So
You can.
yeah,
You may not want to,
no,
but you
yeah,
can.
I mean, that's just incriminating. No, it was cool because I remember I remember coming out and visiting family, and they were doing real time ops, and they had dug like a retainment pond, for fresh water or whatever. They were buying water from us, and that was something that my grandfather and his brothers did to make money. Was they would sell fresh water, and people could come buy it, right? And then for like these real time ops, they actually drilled right behind my uncle's house, which was kind of funny. And so I ended up meeting with like one of the HR or recruiters from Devon right before I was about to go into college, and talking to him. And I'm like, I'm in high school, like I have no idea about anything. And this guy and I were just like chitting and chatting, and I didn't know up from down in regards to oil and gas. And he was like, well, if you ever need an internship, maybe we'll consider you. and it was partially that, and then like going to college, my mother told me basically like you have to get a STEM degree in some capacity. Like I will not finance anything that other than STEM. And I was like, all right, so I guess I'm only applying
STEM
to
it is.
engineering schools. Yeah. I mean, I felt like it was practical because she did institutional equities for Citigroup for her entire career, and basically was like had a background in like psychology or something, and then was working in the finance world. And she's like, my degree is useless. Like my securities licenses mean more than my actual degree. And she's like, and I don't want you to end up in the position where you don't have a job. And I was like, you're paying for it, so I will
Sounds like that.
Go.
sounds like that's the MO for people who send their kids to mines, because the guy John who got me into Conoco, I coached his son in baseball, but he told both his kids like, I'll pay for whatever degree you want as long as it ends in engineering. And what do you do after that is on you, but it better end in engineering.
Yeah.
And they both went to mines and mechanical and chemical engineers, and both in the oil and gas industry. So
yeah. No, and I think it was good advice, at least for us, because like for me, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was so lost, and like I applied wherever. Mine's obviously had the open application and took me. I think it was in some ways I was like, man, it's a fluke that I got in here, but whatever. But I had been doing what is it? I graduated in high school from Dallas, a place called Ursuline Academy, and they actually speaking of Android and Microsoft, Bill and Melinda Gates actually donated a ton of money back to my high school because Melinda Gates went there. And so they had a really good like STEM program compared to like other high schools. And I feel like that kind of piqued my interest. My mom saying like, hey, you have to do this. And I was like, cool. Money makes sense. And then ending up at mines, like I applied and got in, and I remember looking at like the list of companies that came and recruited, and going to like the information session with like Dr. Graves, right? And she talked about petroleum engineering and being the first female doctoral candidate in petroleum engineering and all that. And I was like, okay, seems like a lot of companies come recruit here for oil and gas. Maybe I should do petroleum engineering. And I kind of picked it and just like really, really never looked back. And I liked it enough. And I was like, I don't really want to do mining. I don't want to be an MME. I don't want to do an electrical engineering, although I probably should have done that because that might have been really interesting. But I don't know. It was cool. And it was like, they had really good practical experience, and then it just stuck, right? So
nice.
Yeah, I guess I just hate myself enough to like love what I do.
So did you go right into the data side, or how'd you cut your teeth in the industry once you got out?
So I ended up like John, field engineer, living our best lives out on location, and yeah, represent. Yes, like that's where it's at. I feel like starting off my career as a field engineer at first, I was like, okay, I need this experience, right? I need to go out into the field, and that was something my professors had said, and all this other stuff. And I had several friends who went out the gate and worked for Chevron or what have you, right? And like even seeing young engineers come out and doing training rotations. I think it's really hard when you work for an operator and you're not actually like in charge of the job. Like really what you're doing is project managing, and you don't understand like the nuts and bolts. Which is fair, because if you got too much into the weeds, like you wouldn't be able to do your job of like managing timelines and like coordinating people getting to location, right? And I think for me, starting off with a service company was great because I got a really good understanding of operations. And I just remember having conversations with people, like with other young engineers who had just like no clue. They're like, yeah, people can move in and rig up a frac crew in a day. And I was like, yeah, no, that's that's not realistic.
Yeah, you just have no feel for the scale in the office. I mean, I remember one of our engineers in the office at Conoco, like he made people walk. They had a long hallway. He's like, look, this is like the length of a frac stage right here. Like this whole hallway. Like you just you see these sticks on a map, from this 30,000 foot view, and like you have no idea like the scale and magnitude of these operations. Then you get out in the field, it's just a whole other beast where you see all the equipment and everything, and what it takes to get that stood up.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, John, did you ever have anybody come out and like try and tell you how to do your job? I'm sure you did. Oh.
Yeah, we were pretty fortunate with our consultants being good, and so we didn't have to deal with a lot of engineers coming out and overseeing. But I will tell you, when I moved from the field to the office and I was selling frac work to engineers straight out of college that were PEs that had no idea what the hell a frac job was or what they were doing or anything like that, I was like, why am I not sitting in their seat? Even though I don't have a PE degree, I know a hell of a lot more about what's going on than they do. But that was just on the operations side, right? Like I still didn't, to your point, I had no clue what was happening to the rock, the downhole, the mechanic. Like there's so much more to that, right?
But yeah, and I think that's such a hard thing to like translate, because I went through that phase too, where I was coming out as a field engineer and I was trying to move into like an office capacity because I had met my husband. I was like, I literally, he wasn't my husband at the time, obviously, but like I can't work 15 days on and then 6 days off. I was tired of having breakfast dates at IHOP after I got off of night shift, like you can't have a relationship.
You do a lot of weird stuff when you're in a
relationship
in a frac job. Yeah.
Yes.
I remember leaving location like Easter morning and driving to go to Easter service with my family, and then driving back and going straight out to location. Just like
you make it happen. Like you miss all the holidays. Yeah, I wasn't
even though you're
home
shut
for
down
Christmas. I wasn't home for Thanksgiving, right? Because I was out working. Like I did the wireline piece of it, and it was tough because like we had a much smaller crew, and I was very much like running the job, which was like way more intimidating because they were like they were trying to ramp up operations out here whenever I started, and it was like, we're training you for maybe a month, you're going to get on the job training for maybe 2 weeks, here's a white hat, go, like it is your turn, like take off the green hat. Anyone who asks you how long you've been doing this, you tell them it's been a year and like you lied. I was like, yikes. I was like, is this kosher? And I mean, granted, it's one of those things where like, bureaucracy can get in the way of like scale, right? And that's another reason why I ultimately left. Like at least being at Schlumberger, it was a good company, right? Like I won't knock them for the training and everything else, but it was like so hard for me to be like, okay, for 3 years I'm going to exclusively do field work, and then maybe I'll get promoted into the office, like to go be a product service delivery manager, and then be called at 3 a.m. and then go do sales, and then essentially be put out to pasture at the end of my life. Like, which is fine. Like, obviously I fit that mold of like, I'm very good at like climbing a ladder, so to speak. And like, I probably could have stayed at Schlumberger and been successful, but meeting Alex made me go like, oh, I need to get the heck out of Dodge. Otherwise I'm never going to get married, have kids, or like do anything other than work myself to death. But yeah,
I guess it was a good thing you had those sweet John Wilkes Booth pickup lines.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. How do you feel about having a president killer in your family? It went over great. When you pick someone up at a bar, it can go one of two ways: either really well and you end up married, or really not well.
It's a risk worth taking. Although Midland's a small town, so.
Oh yeah. You know what? You do like, and I'll touch on this before I get into the data piece. Like, I think whenever I first moved out here, and a lot of people straight out of college, I see it still, is like they really struggle with like moving out here, right? And like you said earlier, Bobby, it is such a small community that if you legitimately go out to any bar and you meet somebody, that there's at least 2 degrees of separation. And a good example is like so I'm on the board of SPE out here, which sounds fancy and I guess sounds important. So I'll let you have that illusion. Don't
worry, John and I did a very quick stint with SPE here. Like 2 months.
Well, was it a good time? Was it not a good time?
It was fine. I think we realized pretty quickly this was not a married with kids game. Like a Tuesday 5:00 p.m. meeting.
Oh, really?
Was like, I was like, no, I got my kids.
We had
at
everything
home
going
at
against us.
I don't know. I mean, we do ours at lunch, but anyways, to get into this point is like I met somebody who had just moved to town in January, and she's young and had moved down from Utah, and ironically went to Mines, and ironically was in my sorority because that is what I did at Mines. So you wouldn't know that, but I talked to her on the phone because she was interested in joining SPE and like getting involved with the board. And we talked, and I'm like, hey, like, let's go grab a beer. And then within the last 2 weeks, she was like, oh yeah, I went out to a bar, and I met this girl named like Alexis. And I was like, oh, I know Alexis. And I was like, you should come to our poker nights if you know this girl. Like, we all get together and do ladies poker night, which kind of involves poker, but more often than not does not involve poker.
Kind of like book club.
Well, yeah, my husband made that same joke too. He's like, what do you do at book club except drink wine and not talk about the book? I was like, but
it's a drinking party where you play poker.
Yeah. We kind of play poker, but it was funny because when you go out and you try and meet people, which is hard for engineers in general, or just like anybody who's like technical in any capacity, to like put yourself out there. Like, you will meet people out here, and it is like legitimately you will meet everyone that's like good folks within like guaranteed at least a month. But I think it's such a hard thing for people to get over mentally. And I think for me, like during the pandemic, right, was ultimately when I went back to grad school and got into data. And part of what drove that was like Baker had done massive layoffs. And I swear I'll tie all this together. I'm very roundabout, but I'll get there. But I had left Schlumberger, gone to Baker, was in global product line. They laid everybody off. They were like, get out, goodbye, see you later, hasta luego. Your product is not making us money. It's the day after your birthday. We still don't care. Here's money. See you later. And yeah, pretty standard. So, with having my ego battered and bruised, I was like, well, I guess I need more education. And I was like, I could go get an MBA or I could do something different. And I always thought, I was like, oh, I want to be in the office. I want to be a reservoir engineer because they aren't like abused out in the field and they're not answering phone calls at 3 a.m. and being woken up. And I was like, I'm tired. And I was like, I think it was 25. Wait, I don't remember, but I was still young and I was like, I feel like an old woman, like having been put through the ringer, for like over 2 years, like a little over 2 years. And it was just like, okay, data's really important. And it was like the field aspect, right? Of like, I was submitting Excel spreadsheets with like where we perfed and, like our pump down rates and like all this stuff. And they're like, this is like totally accurate, right? And I was like, dude, I don't know, maybe like, like to be honest, like, are we using, like slick line cable? Are we using like conventional cable? Like it depends on line stretch, but like, we hope those are in the right spot. We really hope those are in the right spot. But if you can be off and you have no idea unless you're going to run a camera down hole. And I mean, like that, you just don't know. And so to me, it was funny to see people put so much, like they're like, oh, this is right, this is accurate. And I was like, trust in God, but not the data.
That was one of the biggest things that drove me crazy coming out of the field into the office was, like going through like RFPs and all of this stuff. And like, you've got all this formalized bureaucracy of stuff. And then it's like, we're going to start adding data analytics to this. So we're pulling all our data in. It's like, man, you guys have no idea about like K factors and how much we can manipulate the data in the field for purposes that would make no sense to an average person or a data engineer, but it happens all the time. Right?
And like even it's so weird because to me, like we use Wellview, right, at SM, and I find errors all the time. Like we have a whole process that's dedicated to QA QCing our data because we need to do that. And it's wild trying to like translating operations back to someone who's a data engineer who's literally never set foot out on location is like telling someone to describe a trip to Italy without ever having been to Italy. Like you can Google, you can ask around, but like until you go to Italy, you're never gonna be able to tell me what Italy's actually like. Other than YouTube, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this: Italy is not like they show on Olive Garden commercials.
No.
The Romans were very not nearly as welcoming as they would make you think on commercials or videos about Italy, and and Florence didn't smell as pretty as I thought it would.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
No, I think, it basically, I decided to go back and get my degree, my master's in analytics, but caveat was I didn't want to leave Midland, which was very uncommon. People were like, you don't want to leave and go back home to Houston? And I was like, no, I'm good. I need space. People are a lot. Like, I can't handle this. But no, I moved back, or not moved back. I wanted to stay in Midland, so that kind of left like 3 options, which was 1, any remote programs Texas Tech, and then UTPB. UTPB didn't really have a program, but Tech did. I applied and they're like, LOL, no. I think they were still mad at me for turning down scholarship money in undergrad, probably, and like not going there. So, but anyways, no, and they had a good program, but they said no, and then I was like, all right, I want to stick exclusively with Texas schools because one, we have good public schools, and then two, we have really good programs, but also like I felt like I needed that. I feel like I needed that bigger school connection because mine was so small. And like anytime I tell anybody, yes, I went to Colorado School of Mines, they're like, oh my God, wow, you must be smart. And I was like, I'm going to let you continue to believe that. But I knew how to suffer for 4 to 5 years and I graduated. So it was a good time. But I think, yeah. Anyways, I ended up at Texas A&M's MS Analytics program, mainly because it was in person and remote. And at the time, I kind of thought it was interesting that they taught it through the Mays Business School. But getting out and having worked in oil and gas and outside of oil and gas, I think that's really the only way in which you can have a program like that, because you can get so technical, right? And you can, like, if I wanted a career in data engineering, I could go full tilt, learn everything I could and go work at, a FANG company. But if you want to solve like actual problems, you really need to think about like, what is my business problem? Like, what are the pain points for my end users?
Yep.
Because as soon as you deviate from like the pain points, you end up with a solution like with a dashboard that no one is ever going to use or open or look at or care about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, what does Elon say? He says engineers optimize for the wrong problems all the time, right?
Yeah. And for me, like, I know whenever I got into the program, I was kind of like, okay, we'll see how this goes. And I was like, oh, maybe we should have more coding classes. And then getting out, I was like, absolutely not. Like, they focused on, like, I was like, basically, it was such a good, I mean, yeah, it was like, don't get me wrong, it was expensive. Like, it's grad school.
Yeah.
Like, come on. But I mean, it was such a good understanding of the entire life cycle of like, one, at the end you had to like present a project, you had to solve a problem, right? And for me, it was for SPE. And it was like, how are people, like, why are people coming to our monthly lunch and learns? How do we increase attendance? And it was essentially figuring out, because that was our biggest pain point, like, was how do we get people to come to these technical luncheons? Like, you can tell people there are continuing education credits associated with it. You can tell them there's food. You can tell them that's at the petroleum club. But like, apparently none of that really matters unless like board members are there talking to people. And like networking wasn't even a huge aspect of it, which I found very fascinating. But I think focusing on like the business problems leads to actual good long-term solutions, right? And that's the key of analytics in general. So.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you can make all the whiz bangs and fancy stuff, but does it deliver what people need? And again, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be simple as long as you understand the problem.
Yeah. No. And I think for me, like I left grad school, or well, at the time it was like 2022. So I had been working with a midstream company, but left and took an opportunity outside of industry because realistically I was looking for jobs here in Midland and no one was hiring like for an actual business intelligence capacity out here. It was more like the word analyst is thrown around way too much, and it can mean a lot of different things. It can mean anything really, and a lot of the jobs I found out here weren't really what I wanted, and so I ended up pivoting to the death industry just to get like the actual analytics experience I needed. And again, I hate myself, I guess, or I think I just really like oil and gas. No, I don't like it. I love it because it's such a small community. You meet folks all the time, right? And it's something that's crucial to everyone's life. And I mean, that's why I ultimately ended up finding this job that I'm in now and moving back into oil and gas and working for SM Energy. And I remember I was working fully remote, right? We had spent the whole summer traveling, basically taken like a mini retirement, as people like to call it. Alex quit his job. I was still working because, again, I am nuts and I love working. I can't not work. But what was it? No, whenever this opportunity came up, I think Bobby, you had hit me up about it, and then Brian McDowell had hit me up about it, and I was like, clearly I should apply for this job. And it kind of worked out, and well, kind of, it did work out because I got the job, and now I've been at SM for the last like 4 months, and it's really fun to be back in industry and to solve like these sorts of problems and to like, you know, have that operational piece and actually work with like the completions team and help them build out solutions that make sense for them. So full circle.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as far as like coming back into the industry and then like, because again, before when you were in the industry, you weren't too tied in on the data side. So
Right.
what's surprised you, you know, from a technical side of like the tooling and stuff that's used relative to say what you were using in outside the industry and grad school, now coming into it, and like what would be some recommendations, you know, whether it's SM or just the industry as a whole?
Yeah. I honestly, you know, I think for people like anyone who's getting into analytics, it's like I wouldn't even worry about learning Power BI or Spotfire or what have you. Learn SQL, learn how to query the database, learn your data, like get real friendly with the IT guys who do the, you know, IT infrastructure management, like understand how they're pulling things in, why they're pulling things in, how often is everything updated. Like, really it's learning, like, again, learn SQL because anyone can learn a visualization software, like any visualization software. They are not complicated. They like are just making pretty graphs. That's it. But if you don't have your data structured the way you need it, you're screwed. So SQL.
Yeah, I think that's. I think a lot of people get ahead of themselves, right? Like they're like, oh, I want to code or I want to build dashboards or whatever. But it's like pretty much, I mean, the entire internet and all of the apps, everything uses a database. So learn databases because it's incredibly useful across the board out of the gate.
Well, and SQL's not going anywhere. I mean, I think there was the push for no SQL and this and that and the other, and guess what won out? SQL. I mean, it's not going anywhere. And then everyone else has their own flavor. It may not be SQL like anti-SQL, but every, you know, there's like Kafka has KSQL, and there's just all these QLs that end up being a derivative of SQL even. So I 100% agree.
Yeah. No, because I think people like want to graduate into like Python and like all this stuff. And not that like Python's not a good tool. I love it. It's great. And like it's really scalable. It's got a lot of great features. But I think for starting out, just learning SQL to start is easy. When I started learning it, I had no idea and I was so lost and I was like, what is this? But I will tell you right now, in industry and outside of industry, a bulk of my job is just getting data into the correct format that I need it to, because the rest of it does not matter. Literally does not matter.
Yeah, no, I mean, you got to model the data, because again, how you model it and then are able to pull it into your visualization platforms makes a big difference too, whether you're putting in third normal form or whatever else. But I'm getting a little deep in the weeds here. But but no, I mean, yes, SQL is just, well, I mean, I think a lot of people understate how much optimization they can do, whether it's even their web apps and or their applications, of like offload as much of that to the database as you can. It is almost always going to be more efficient than pulling it across the wire and then transforming it on your local memory or wherever you're doing it, it's almost always going to be better to do that in the warehouse and more optimized. So
yeah, no, even for one of my, I'm going to let John speak. Passing popcorn, John.
No, I was just gonna say we've got 2 minutes left, so
well,
gotta jump into
we've got to wrap it up, huh?
the speed round.
All right, what's lightning round? Hit me with it.
You go first, John.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do some favorite either follows or kind of reads.
Oh, like
either books or social follows.
You know, I really like Alex the Analyst on YouTube. Like, he's really good. He's also on LinkedIn, and there's this LinkedIn, not LinkedIn, but there's this YouTube channel called StatQuest that is amazing. I would highly recommend it to everybody if you're trying to like learn more about like machine learning, because this guy essentially dumbs it down so much that it's really funny to watch. That is also how I passed my statistics class, my higher level stat class. But I think those two are great because one of them teaches you like a good robust baseline of like the tools you need to know, and then the other takes you to that next level. So those two for sure.
Staying on the SQL train, what's your favorite flavor or SQL engine?
I mean, you know, I feel like after a certain point, they're all the same, and it just doesn't matter because right now I'm having to use Denodo, which is kind of like Denodo VQL, which is a little bit different. But SQL Server, I think, is always a favorite just because it's old school.
It's always there.
Yeah, well, it's like it's
the OG.
Yeah, it's the OG. It's easy. I like how they have their. I like the language structure better in SQL Server than like VQL is like work. Like no, I don't like it. It's dumb, but it still works.
All right, so on that real quick, like I had my poll the other week. I don't know if you answered it or not. Is when you hear SQL, do you think of SQL Server or the language? What do you think of?
I think of the select statements. I'm like, select star from whatever table.
Yeah.
And then like,
exactly.
yeah, like top 10, you know, like if you're ever getting into data, like you always just look at the top 10 rows, just do that query and pull everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Take that, Jeff. No.
What was his answer?
Oh man.
No, that's why we ended up doing that bet was because can y'all hear me? I said I was trying to reconnect for a second.
Yeah, you're good.
That's why I ended up posting it because Jeff was trying to convince me in a text chain that like everyone thinks SQL Server. And I was like, you need to get out of your Oklahoma City bubble, buddy.
No. No.
So it's all good.
We love Jeff.
Yeah, I'm gonna take my victory lap.
All right. What other questions can I answer? The wisdom is open.
No, that we'll wrap it up. What's your favorite, your go-to cloud?
Oh, I feel like Azure is great as well as AWS, but I don't know. Like again, it's sometimes I think it comes down to like personal preference, and in order to get really good in this industry, you shouldn't care. Like you should get comfortable with all of them.
Yep.
Like, you know, Azure, AWS, and GCP, like you need familiarity with all of them. And that makes you.
And at their core, they have the same offerings and they, it's the same concepts. Like if I know how to set up virtual networks and whatever else, it's, I just need to figure out what they're calling it.
Yeah.
But it's, the same principles apply.
Yeah. Just different cost structures. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks guys for round 2.
Yeah, thanks for doing this again.
Hey, no problem.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Let me know if we need to do a round 3. Like, I swear I can come up with like better iterations of stories.
Well, hopefully round 3 we'll be building on the round 2 that people heard. So,
yeah. I don't know. I mean, They could always, I guess, use the audio from round 1 and round 2. I don't know.
Also, yeah. So I think the last part was where can people find you?
So definitely on LinkedIn. Yeah. I think I attached my personal, like, I have a personal website because I am that level of like nerdy. It's not super up to date, but it has my phone number, email, and then like there's a cute little contact form. So if you are too lazy to copy and paste an email, you can like type a message, and I think it still comes to my email. But
Nice.
So
Got to make it easy. Again, all those different opportunities for touch points, right?
Yeah. Well, I thought I was creative when I called it BF Enterprises because, I don't know. My last
Like Booth Foster, I'm assuming.
Well, no, originally it wasn't, but kind of. My mom always made the joke that Midland was out in BFE, which is freaking Egypt. Or if you want to be like more creative, insert a different word for freaking. So for me, that was kind of the funny thing, but also Booth Foster just kind of works. So yeah, no, those two ways are guaranteed methods of finding me.
Nice. Or just go to a bar in Midland.
Pretty much, yeah. Awesome. You might find me, or just walking on the street, Yeah. But anyways, you guys enjoy your Friday, and
will do.
I guess I'll talk to you guys soon.